We want to start this podcast out with a little disclaimer. We're going to get into some logic. We're going to get into some heady stuff. We want you to stick with this because this continues a series that ultimately will be really helpful to our kids. We are into week 3 of how to teach your kids how to critically think. I don't know if there were 2 hows in the original title, but we're now
the how-to to the how-to.
The how-to to the how-to. We've talked about how important it is to think critically. Number one, as a kind of part of our worship of God, our love for God. Matthew 22, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And so critical thinking is a part of that, loving God. So as we disciple the next generation, we want them to love God holistically. It's not merely an emotional response. It's not just our affections and emotions, but it's the mind as well that we love God with. When we reason well or when we think well, it helps us to live well. We've talked about how it helps us to see more in the world. It helps us to spot the lies out there in the culture. So there's so many important reasons why we need to teach our kids to think critically. And then in that second session, I mean, we got kind of laid out a tool that's so important, and that's asking good questions. And what we want to do in this session is offer a few more tools, offer some logical thinking, because I think we mentioned this earlier, and most of us can admit, those of us who have been publicly educated or even privately educated here in America, or probably around the world. I'm guessing it's the minority of educational programs or systems out there actually teach logic, but I'm raising my hand right now. I never had logic training. Did you have logic training, Erin?
Do you mean in like high
Formal
school?
logic training in middle school, elementary, middle school, or high school?
Oh, no, not until college.
Yeah. And then also after living with me, I've been able to train you well and learn.
Oh, brother.
Who's trained who?
That's sarcasm, listeners. If you're wondering, that's definitely not true. It's sarcasm.
Often, actually, I would say most of my sarcastic comments are humorous because they're clearly not true.
Clearly. That one was clearly not true.
So, no, we've learned, I think it's kind of been fun to learn logic together as we've been on our homeschooling journey with our kids and trying to teach the kids logic. And kind of what we're going to go through today is some of the formal logic. We're actually going to give some tools. I think what we want to do today is go through. And when I say formal logic,
I know, it sounds intimidating.
Some of the audience, they just turned this off right now. They're like,
when you say formal, that sounds intimidating and boring. That's what comes to mind.
Exactly. I was trying to illustrate. That's our reaction. Part of it is because we don't have a whole lot of experience in this, so it may also sound intimidating. So yeah, no, don't turn the podcast off yet. We'll talk a little bit about some logical fallacies, because I think that's a way to maybe ease into logic a little bit more versus talking about inductive arguments and deductive arguments, those are important things. So anyone who is out there and you've had formal logic, I'm not saying that's not good stuff. And we have some tools for that. But one of the ways I think to help your kids, and you're just thinking, with our kids and with ourselves, how do we whet the appetite a little bit? How do we help them see the value of critical thinking? And I think this is where logical fallacies is a good entry point. And so,
yeah, and I think a good way to do it is to actually introduce them to the names of certain fallacies like we're going to talk about, and then to give the kids examples, because formal logic sounds boring and difficult or whatever I had said earlier.
The modern American mind that's been
it can
on
sound
a screen
that way. Yes.
For
but it's actually fun to learn because then you really start seeing how illogical so many people are. And you'll see it. I don't just mean like with your family and friends, but you'll be watching, the news or watching something on TV, and you'll see these things come up. And when you learn them, it's fun because you're seeing through it.
Yeah, there's an opening of your eyes that happens over
Yeah.
time that is, it gives you a confidence. Like, oh, okay, I can spot some of the lies out there. I'm able to see things that maybe I didn't see before.
Yeah.
So, a logical fallacy is just a mistaken reasoning. That's what we're talking about. And it's faulty reasoning. And there are different ways that our reasoning goes wrong. We can reason improperly. And so what logical fallacies help us to do is help us to see all the different ways that we can do that. And human beings are really good. Fallen human beings are really good at being unreasonable. And so let's just go through some basic logical fallacies, and we'll kind of explain them, maybe give a few examples. But definitely towards the end, I think we'll try to take people through some different fallacies that kind of end up being objections to the Christian faith that we can also use with our kids. Okay, so the first fallacy that we'll cover today is a common one. People may be more familiar with this. It's called an ad hominem, which the Latin there refers to against the man or to the man. Okay.
Like sticking it to the man?
Yeah. I guess that's what the fallacy is. You're trying to stick it to the man. You're attacking the man.
So it's basically, in translated meaning, it's name calling.
That's right. It's name calling.
It's like when you don't have anything good in response to me, you resort to this. You'll start saying, "You mean wife, you."
Well, even
because I've given you so many good arguments in what I'm saying, and you have nothing left to say. So then you just attack me personally.
Honey, I have never attacked you personally. Make that clear for our audience. No, don't do that. You can't let people think that that's actually serious. She's being sarcastic right now, folks.
Oh, okay.
No, it's not even like if you have nothing else to say, you do it. Unfortunately, in our culture, we've been taught to lead with this.
Yeah.
Right? So it doesn't matter whether or not you have something, a good response or a good argument. This is just where you start. So here would be a great little activity that you could do with your kids. Hey, what are some ways or what are some names that we use when we're engaging with other people who maybe don't believe what we believe or who we disagree with? What are names that we use for them? Let's think about what the culture says.
Oh, like bad names?
No, not like.
Let's list all the bad names we can call people.
What's the worst name that someone's called you? No. So, and we can give a couple examples here. Okay, so what do people call Christians? All right, we don't include the curse words that Erin was referring to. But what kind of names do we call Christians when the world's trying to engage with them or shut them down or whatever? So, for instance, I'm thinking like you fundamentalist, right? Or when it comes to a particular issue, right? You Christians are bigots. You're a homophobe. You're a transphobe, right? These are all different names. Politically, we see this where there's all kinds of name calling. Oh, you MAGA Republican. Oh, you libtard. Oh, you leftist nut job. Oh, you right-wing conspiracy theorist. Things like that. That's what we're referring to. And it would be good to get our kids to try to recognize those things. That these are simply names that are going to be thrown out. Notice they don't deal with any part of the argument. So, for instance, as a Christian, if I make the claim that Jesus is the exclusive means to salvation. Jesus is the only way. He's the way, the truth, and the life. And someone responds by saying, well, you Christians are so narrow-minded, right? We want to help our kids see, and we want to see, that this is nothing more than name-calling. And we'll walk through these a little bit more. But with some of these examples. But that's what an ad hominem is. And that's a real easy one to teach our kids. And it's real common. So they're going to want to, be able to recognize that.
Yeah.
And that they don't have to be quiet, or they don't have to stop talking, or they don't have to feel like they've been shut down when someone calls them this name. Oh, you're a transphobe. And oh gosh, I don't want to be thought of as a transphobe, and well, maybe I better not engage anymore. Maybe I should just keep my mouth shut. No, it's good to be able to learn to see that, and then maybe even sometimes confront that.
Yeah.
That's really nothing more than maybe a sophisticated way to call people names.
Yeah. That is so common now. It seems like that is all that debating, at least on Twitter, that's all the debating that happens is the back and forth name calling. So it is good to train our kids and to train ourselves to recognize this right away, so that we don't get pulled into this kind of back and forth, which isn't fruitful, and it's not logical thinking. It's not good thinking.
Yeah, and it's not an option for those of us who are believers.
Yeah.
Where our speech is to be seasoned with salt. As Paul talks about, right? We just can't engage like the world does. Yeah. And you see Christians being drawn into that, at least definitely on social media. Twitter, you mentioned Twitter. If you're not on Twitter, I recommend you don't ever get on Twitter. It is a cesspool sometimes, but you see a lot of that, and Christians doing it as well. Now, there is a time, and we're not saying there isn't a time to engage forcefully. Sometimes there's a time to be confrontive. The Proverbs talks about answering a fool with his folly. And it also says, don't answer a fool with his folly. And I think the take there is that, hey, there are times to engage and confront, and other times where you're dealing with someone who's being very foolish and it's not wise to engage. So, but okay, so ad hominem. Here's a second major logical fallacy that we need to be familiar with, and that's what we call a straw man. So
straw man is basically that you paint up or put up a fictional argument or idea or character. Basically, you put up something that isn't really what the person is arguing, and then you knock that down, which is easy to do because that's a lot of times that wasn't even what they were arguing in the first place. So an example of that, I was thinking we brought up a couple weeks ago when we posted the Christopher Yuan clip about the indoctrination that's happening to kids in schools with this transgender stuff. And we got lots of comments, but some were like, this isn't happening in my school, and so therefore it's not happening. And there were other comments too. But one thing that we noticed was that Christopher Yuan didn't actually make the claim that it was happening in every single school. He was making a generalization about how it is rampant throughout. Yeah. And so people think if they show one example of a school, then that knocks down Christopher Yuan's argument. And it doesn't. It's
misrepresenting someone's view or misrepresenting their argument. And some of you are maybe you're wondering, hey, why is this called straw man? Well, it's take some clothing and fill it with straw, right? And see how easy it is to knock that down versus knocking down a real human being. That's where we get the name from. And so it's not fair in argumentation to misrepresent someone's views, to not take their view seriously, and then say, look, I kind of defeated your argument. So straw man is a second one that we're going to need to be able to recognize, because that often the world will do that to Christian views of things, is that they will caricature it, right? Put up a straw man. Okay, so you got straw man, ad hominem. Here's another one that's common. It's called the genetic fallacy. And just think of the word, when you think of the word genetic, think of the word Genesis, right? The first book of the Bible. What is that referring to? It's referring to beginning or origin, right? And so same root word, genetic fallacy. The genetic fallacy is trying to discredit a claim based on its origin. Like, okay, so where the claim comes from. But if you think about it, where our beliefs come from is actually irrelevant to whether or not they are true. So, for instance, let's say I learned that 2 + 2 = 4 from my kindergarten teacher, Miss Crabapple. Okay. And that's where I learned it. That was the origin of my belief to the mathematical equation, 2 + 2 = 4. All right, Miss Crabapple taught me that. Later on, I discover Miss Crabapple, she falsified her records. She actually never graduated from high school. She never got her college degree, never got her teaching credential. She was embezzling money from the school. She went to prison, right? She's a schizophrenic, all these things. And we say, oh my gosh, well, you should stop believing that 2 + 2 = 4, or you call into question, you try to discredit my view that 2 + 2 = 4 based upon the origin, right, where it came from. Would it follow that 2 + 2 does not = 4 because Miss Crabapple, this scandalous woman, is the one who taught it to me? No. And it's kind of a humorous illustration to show that you can't simply discredit someone's view based upon where it comes from. And we'll give some examples of how this is done to Christians.
Yeah, this is what C.S. Lewis is talking about when he says, you must show that a man is wrong before you start explaining why he is wrong.
That's right.
So you take the claim not where it came from first, and you examine the idea, the claim that's made first, and the legitimacy of that before you start attacking.
Yeah, his psychology. They're trying to explain
or
why.
Mrs. Crabapple or whoever it is.
Yeah. Okay, so our fourth logical fallacy is what is referred to as a non sequitur. Okay, what's a non sequitur? That's when your conclusion or your statement does not logically follow from the argument that you've given or the statements that you've made. Okay, that's a non sequitur. So let me give you an example of a non sequitur. If I said Jack and John are best friends, and then I said Jack is crying, and then I said therefore John is not a very caring person, right? Does that follow from those previous statements? Jack and John are best friends. Jack is crying. Therefore, John doesn't care about Jack or something like that. Well, we can clearly see that doesn't follow. There could be some other reason why Jack is crying. It doesn't necessarily follow that it's because John is not caring. Mm-hmm. And so that is what we want to see, what we want to point out is how sometimes conclusions are drawn, but they're not justified. They don't follow from the argument that's given. That is a non sequitur.
Okay, so the last one we'll cover is the logical fallacy of contradiction. So these are claims that are self-refuting. And what does self-refuting mean? They refute themselves. They actually defeat themselves. The statement itself contradicts itself and explodes.
There's kind of and explodes. There is this contradiction kind of contained within the statement that you want to expose.
Yeah.
And I think maybe the best way to understand this one is just by looking at different examples, right? So there's all kinds of humorous self-defeating or self-refuting claims. And just so folks know, there is some difference between kind of a formally self-refuting claim and something that's just merely self-contradictory. But for our purposes, as kind of an introduction, we're just going to kind of keep all of that in one category. You've got self-contradiction. So, for instance, if I said, I cannot speak a single word of English. Well, I've just uttered a contradictory statement right there. Because what am I doing as I utter or speak that sentence? I am speaking it in English while I'm saying I can't speak it in English. So obviously you see the contradiction. Or someone says, my brother is an only child. For a long time, he's been an only child, right? Now, my brother may wish he were an only child, but if he is my brother, he is, by definition, not an only child. He has siblings. And so those are the kind of things that we can spot. And so, all right, so those are 5 real kind of basic logical contradictions. And now before we kind of look at a few examples, let's just give some resources.
Okay.
For those out there who are like, yeah, I need some help on this. Hey, there are a lot of good resources. I'd say for adults, I mean, I think it was last episode, we mentioned the Tactics book. We're just going to mention that again. Greg Kokel, Tactics. It goes through some of these different logical fallacies. He's referring to them as tactics, but he covers some of these same things. So that's a good resource for adults and for high schoolers and even for middle schoolers. I think raise the bar. I think a middle schooler can get through this. Greg's a really good writer. So you've got Tactics as a good resource for the older students and for the parents. I'd say another really good book, I would just say for all parents, this is one book that I say is a kind of a must read. And it's a challenging read for a lot of adults who have grown up in an overly emotional, anti-intellectual Christianity. So this one is going to challenge you, but you can get it. And what J.P. Moreland does in his book, Love Your God with All Your Mind, is he really lays out the role that the mind plays in our spiritual transformation, some of the things that we need to do, some of the things that are barriers and obstacles to engaging our intellect, and then what we need to do to re-engage the intellect. And he actually covers some logical thinking in this. And so he gives a brief lesson in logic in a chapter entitled Clearing the Cobwebs from Our Mental Attics. And that's a great title. Clearing the Cobwebs from Our Mental Attics. You've got to do that if you are going to think critically and if you're going to teach your kids to think critically. So this is one I think, just in general, is a very important book in terms of just the discipleship of adults, and really the subtitle is The Role of Reason in the Life of the Soul. So 2 good books that are foundational on this. Now, some resources that are more kid-specific or student-specific. Okay, Erin, you've got a few in front of you.
Yeah, these are ones we've done with our kids, so we know we can recommend these with a clear conscience because we've done them with our kids. The first one is the Fallacy Detective, and it goes through different fallacies. It's good for an elementary age kid, probably all the way through elementary school. Although if you do this book with your 2nd and 3rd grader, by the time they're in 5th and 6th grade, they're going to be ready for meatier books. But this is a good book. It has cute lessons, good examples, and walks kids through fallacies.
And let me just say, I think it's really a good idea to start kids young on this. I mean, when you're looking at kind of classical education and the different stages of classical education, you've got your grammar stage and then your logic stage. And that's generally kind of 5th through 8th grade. But if you can start earlier, you can really raise the bar for kids. And this book is good for those younger ages with kind of cartoon characters and that kind of thing. But raise the bar early, start earlier, this would be the tool I think we'd say start. This one will help you start earlier with kids.
Yeah. So the next one, or actually both of these, are written by William Lane Craig, who's a Christian philosopher who writes lots of academic books. But these two curriculums were written for kids. So the first one is called Learning Logic. And again, it has just different lessons on formal logic. So how to build an argument and different
kind of different structures of different arguments.
Yes, exactly. And it walks the students through how to do that, gives them lots of examples, and then gives room for them to try to write out these logical arguments themselves. So that's a good resource, again, for a parent or a homeschool teacher or a Christian school teacher who's not sure where to start with kids. Mm-hmm. These are great resources to help kind of walk you through that. And the third one we'll mention is also by William Lane Craig. Like I said, it's called The Defense Never Rests, a workbook for budding apologists. So they recommend this for use in home or Sunday school class or a junior high youth group or something like that you can go through different arguments for God's existence. And so it goes through the design argument, the moral argument, the ontological argument. So you can see now these resources are progressing. And so this is much more for junior
probably
high,
middle school, high school
student,
yeah.
and starts getting into the arguments for God's existence. And if they have good training in how to make an argument, then this stuff's really going to click with them.
Yeah, and I think the thing to mention about this workbook is it has a lot of fill in the blank. So it's kind of simplistic in its kind of teaching style that way. Because I think when I did this, I think Micah and Paige were in later elementary when I first started this one with them. But you can get that one.
And logic is more mathematical. Because I'm just thinking about, the filling in the blank or the writing out stuff. So I do think it's good to have the mindset that learning logic is kind of mathematical. Mm-hmm. And so it takes some work that way. And it's not like you're going to sit down and read these as like a storybook to your kid.
Right.
So it's different that way.
Yeah. And it's important to recognize the different subjects and the different ways that we need to approach them and how they'll stretch us. Mm-hmm. Right. And so if you just go to the thing that draws you, so maybe you're drawn to story, and most of us are, or literature, and you may want to avoid logic, and then you will not develop a well-rounded mind. Mm-hmm. Vice versa, if you are more of that engineer mind, well, maybe you need to read more, fiction. Another resource is a book that is just been updated by our friend Juan Valdez, How to Think, a crash course in critical thinking. Juan is with a ministry called Reasons for Hope. You can get his book on Amazon. He is in the process of just revising it and expanding it, and it looks fantastic for kind of a high school logic textbook. This is really well done, and it's just very clear.
You say textbook.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I think in one sense, all the books on logic are textbookish, right? There's not.
Oh, that sounds horrible.
Well,
textbooks
what
are
you
the
just
worst.
recommended are textbooks. Well, we don't like textbooks generally speaking, so I should probably avoid that language. Mm-hmm. It is a book. Mm-hmm. It has
that walks
text.
you through.
No, that walks you through kind of formal logic. Mm-hmm. And again, that doesn't sound appealing. Formal logic to some people, which again, probably, I think the lack of appeal probably has to do with our background, our training on this.
Yeah, and that's why I think with our kids, with the students that we're attempting to do this with, the more real life stuff you can bring to them show them a TikTok video, and then say, okay, what's wrong with the claim that this person made? Or they made 5 claims. Can you recognize those 5 claims?
Okay, so let's not forget one of the best resources out there. Our friend, Tim Barnett, who's with, the old ministry I used to be with, Stand to Reason, good friends over there. Tim has a YouTube channel called Red Pen Logic. Mm-hmm. And Tim does a great job in 3-4 minute videos of taking TikTok videos, different videos people put up on Instagram or on social media where they're attacking some aspect of Christianity or raising an objection, and he responds to it. And he does it very concisely, very clearly. Mm-hmm. He's a good logical thinker himself, so he is able to help you and help your students see these things. So that maybe is a good place to start with your high school student, your middle school student, is Red Pen Logic.
Yeah, and I mean, the presidential elections are going to be coming again. And so a thing we've done with our kids many times is watching debates, because debates are going to happen. And these are people who are trying to be the leader of our country or our state or your city or whatever. And so watching those with the kids, and maybe if they're young, don't make them sit through the whole painful process, but even a little bit of that, and say, okay, was their argument sound? They said this, did they back it up with facts? Or they said this, was this just an attack, or did they actually have an idea that they put forward? There's all kinds of things that we have at our fingertips to show kids why it's important, because this stuff is happening all around us.
Yeah, I think what you said is really important, because we have been wrestling here a little bit with the textbook, formal logic, the challenge of teaching this stuff. And probably the best way to teach it is to connect it to real life, to what's going on out there. Because
that felt need, that, we talked about the immersive experience trips that we take the kids on. And one of the most powerful parts about it is it gets students into conversations with people who believe different things. And then the students realize how important it is to know our theology, to know the arguments for the Christian faith, because they're talking to someone. And for example, when we go to Utah, they'll talk to Mormons who know more Bible references than they do. And so it creates this felt need, oh shoot, I've got to study this. And so when we expose them to stuff in the culture, or we're watching a movie and we pause it and say, okay, they just said a big idea right there, we're going to talk about it for a minute. And so this is the stuff that they see, they're connected to. And so we bring it right to their felt needs. We bring it right to real life and show them how this stuff is really valuable to know.
Yeah. Okay. I think that is probably enough ground to cover for this podcast. So here's what we want to do for the next one, though. Let's go through some specific examples of some of these arguments or these claims that commit logical fallacies. And I think by doing that, you'll be able to see why it's so important to know these things, because you'll be able to spot them. And so I think that might be a good way to kind of take this stuff and say, all right, let's apply it now to the real claims that we have to deal with, and that we have to help our kids navigate in order to strengthen their faith against these kinds of objections.
Maven exists to help the next generation know truth, pursue goodness, and create beauty for the cause of Christ. To find out more, check out maventruth.com.